The Clerk.
Second reading, a bill for an act to provide an economic response and deal with other matters relating to the coronavirus and for related purposes.
We're now going to move to the detailed stage in a second. I'll just call the Clerk again.
Second reading, a bill for an act about loan guarantees and for related purposes. Second reading, a bill for an act about Commonwealth investment in the Australian Business Growth Fund and for related purposes. Second reading, a bill for an act to appropriate money for community, regional and industry support as part of the coronavirus economic response and for related purposes. Second reading, a bill for an act to establish the Structured Finance Support Coronavirus Economic Response Fund and for related purposes. Second reading, a bill for an act to appropriate additional money out of the Consolidated Revenue Fund for the ordinary annual services of the government in relation to the coronavirus economic response and for related purposes. Second reading, a bill for an act to appropriate additional money out of the Consolidated Revenue Fund for certain expenditure in relation to the coronavirus economic response and for related purposes. Second reading, a bill for an act to provide for a cash flow boost relating to the coronavirus and for related purposes.
The House will now consider the bill in detail. In accordance with the resolution agreed earlier, the bill will be taken as a whole. The resolution also provided that any government amendments to the bills that have been circulated to be treated as if they had been moved together. Any opposition amendments to the bills that may have been circulated to be treated as if they had been moved together. And any amendments circulated by non-aligned members which have been circulated to be treated as if they had been moved together. Copies of the amendments that have been circulated have been placed on the table. The question is that the bill be agreed to. The Minister.
Thanks, Madam Deputy Speaker. I present a supplementary explanatory memorandum to the bill.
Thank the Minister. The question is that the government amendments be agreed to. The member for Whitlam seeking the call first. The member for Whitlam.
Thanks, Deputy Speaker. I move the amendments that have been circulated in my name. It is the position of the Australian Labor Party that we want to provide support for households, we want to provide support for businesses, and we want to provide support for workers who are about to lose their jobs. We're told by the Treasurer during question time today that in the coming weeks up to 1 million workers are going to find themselves out of work. Labor stands ready to support the government in providing benefits to those workers. The Leader of the Opposition has spelt out in comprehensive detail why the provisions in Schedule 13 are a bad idea. They're a bad idea because the government proposes to raid the superannuation savings of workers to make up for the unwillingness it has to fund benefits adequately for workers who are about to lose their job. It is our patriotic obligation to point out a bad idea. The only thing worse than a bad idea is a bad idea that is poorly implemented. And unless Labor's amendments are accepted by the government, this proposal will be poorly implemented. 1.6 million applicants, we are advised by the government, 1.6 million applicants are expected to take avail of the new provisions within this schedule. Those 1.6 million applicants will make their application to access superannuation through the MyGov portal. Yes, Madam Deputy Speaker, the very MyGov portal that fell over during its first test this morning. Not only did it fall over, it was unable to cope with the overwhelming number of people who are applying to access Centrelink benefits. But the minister responsible stood in the courtyard a few moments ago and said that this was as a result of a denial of service attack. He then had to come into question time a few moments later and said, actually that was wrong, that was not true. So Labor has significant problems, and we ask the minister to respond to this. Labor has significant problems. How is Labor, how is the opposition, in fact, how are the Australian people to have confidence that this measure is going to be properly implemented? Is it going to be a repeat of the bushfire grants all over again, where big announcements are made, but they fall over in the implementation? We are deeply concerned because of the mechanisms around which this schedule will operate. The 1.6 million applicants go to MyGov. They make their application through MyGov. MyGov sends it through to the regulator, who in this instance is the ATO, and the ATO is the assessing and approval authority. Now, most people will think, well, if the ATO is the approving authority, then a payment can be easily issued from the ATO. But this is not the case. The ATO sends a notice to the trustees of the member's superannuation fund saying, please pay this money into this member's bank account. Sounds reasonable. The only problem is the superannuation accounts don't have that information. They don't have that information. Now, with all the goodwill in the world, the minister might wish they did, the parliament may wish they did, but the simple fact of the matter is they don't. They don't have that information. So Labor's amendment, a sensible amendment, if the government seriously wants to make its idea, albeit flawed, work properly, accept Labor's amendments. Simple, perfect in its simplicity, ensure that when the ATO contacts the superannuation fund and said this fund member is eligible to receive early relief, then the ATO must provide the superannuation fund with all the information that they have that will enable the superannuation fund to make an early release of that fund. We say to the government, accept this amendment. Accept this amendment. It will make your proposal, albeit flawed, work all the more better. The consequence of not accepting Labor's amendment is that those applicants will go to the superannuation fund, and up to 1.6 million Australians who have been led to believe by the government that they're going to get ready release of their superannuation funds are going to be frustrated by delay. And I'm not talking about delays of days or even weeks. It could be significant delays if we are talking about 1.6 million Australians who are going to make an application between now and July and the end of June this year, and quite possibly another application a week later. It will fall over in the same way that MyGov fell over, except our reasonable amendments.
And I give the call to the Minister.
Well, thanks very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Look, our clear advice from Treasury is that this amendment is just completely not necessary. And I must say to the member, the well-established processes for releasing money from super, which there are obviously existing hardship grounds, but there are a range of other cases where there's been non-concessional excess contributions and others that require releases of funds from a member's superannuation account are done quite regularly. Of course, there's going to be increased demand on the system, but what he is proposing, our clear advice from Treasury, make the provisions less clear, don't add anything practically, and in the end, it will be, of course, a task to make sure that these applications are made and are delivered in an expeditious way. But what the member for Whitlam is proposing does absolutely nothing to assist that process. These are understood processes, and really an important part of this entire package is, wherever possible, that we utilise existing delivery and administrative systems.
Give the call to the member for Melbourne.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I had a matter that I wanted to raise about the government amendments, and I don't think we concluded that issue before going on to the opposition ones. I'm just conscious of the 5 o'clock
I'll just
deadline.
indicate to the member I haven't put the vote on the government amendments as yet.
Then can I, if I can raise it now, to just be quick, I'm just wondering if the government can explain about its amendments or its bill. Do these amendments extend the assistance that's going to be available, the coronavirus assistance, to students on youth allowance? There are many students on youth allowance who would have been doing a couple of extra shifts to top up their youth allowance. A lot of those shifts have now been cancelled because they're often in the hospitality sector, sometimes in the retail sector. Those people are now going to fall behind. Now, the government's given some welcome assistance to youth allowance job seeker. That's in line with what the Greens have been calling for some time. I'm just wondering if the government can clarify, is it extending, and especially given that the Prime Minister last night on television, when he was asked whether students are going to be supported, said yes, students will be supported. But the bill seems to suggest the opposite. So can the government clarify, before the bill proceeds through here, are students receiving youth allowance going to get the extra coronavirus payment? And if not, why not? Given that they may be losing significant amounts of money and may be hurting at the moment, and they've still got rent and bills to pay as well.
The Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Very briefly, the amendments moved by the government bring forward waiting period and asset test application rules. This is obviously an evolving pandemic, moving very quickly, and the amendments bring forward the application of those two provisions to ensure that payments can be made more expeditiously and that the asset test doesn't apply.
So the question before the Chair is that the government amendments be agreed to, and the member for Melbourne seeks the call.
Just very briefly, can the government please confirm that students on youth allowance won't be eligible for the coronavirus assistance, despite the fact the Prime Minister said on television last night they would be? It's in fact the case that students who've lost income because they've lost their casual work will now not be eligible for the additional assistance. And the government please confirm that yes or no. We should be able to get a clear answer about who's covered by this bill, given that we're being asked to vote on it urgently.
Thank the member. The question before the Chair is that the government amendments be agreed to. Being no further speakers, I intend to put the question. All those in agreement that the government amendments be agreed to say aye. Those against no. Declare the motion carried. It's now my intention to put the opposition amendments. The question is that the opposition amendments be agreed to. All those in agreement say aye. Sorry, yes, we say that the opposition amendments be agreed to. All those, no, be disagreed to. All those in agreement say aye. Those against no. No. Declare the motion carried. Division is required. Yes. Ring the bells for 4 minutes.
Wrong. Yeah.
You're invading my personal space. Lock the doors. Order. The question is that the opposition amendments be disagreed to. The ayes will pass to the right of the chair, the noes to the left. I appoint the honourable members for Boothby and Nichols tellers for the ayes, and the honourable members for Lawler and Werriwa tellers for the noes. Order. The result of the division is ayes 49, noes 38. The question is therefore resolved in the affirmative. The question now is that this bill as amended be agreed to. All those of that opinion say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. No, hang on. You don't. I have received messages from His Excellency the Governor-General recommending, in accordance with Section 56 of the Constitution, appropriations for the purposes of the Coronavirus Economic Response Package Omnibus Bill 2020, the Guarantee of Lending to Small and Medium Enterprises Coronavirus Economic Response Package Bill 2020, the Australian Business Growth Fund Coronavirus Economic Response Package Bill 2020, the Structured Finance Support Coronavirus Economic Response Package Bill 2020, and the Boosting Cash Flow for Employers Coronavirus Economic Response Package Bill 2020. This bill, as amended, has been agreed to. In accordance with the resolution agreed earlier, I will now put the question that this bill be read a third time. All those of that opinion say aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The clerk.
Third reading, a bill for an act to provide an economic response and deal with other matters relating to coronavirus and for related purposes.
The clerk.
Third reading, a bill for an act about loan guarantees and for related purposes.
The clerk.
Third reading, a bill for an act about Commonwealth investment in Australian Business Growth Fund and for related purposes. Third reading, a bill for an act to appropriate money for community, regional and industry support as part of the coronavirus economic response and for related purposes. Third reading, a bill for an act to establish the Structured Finance Support Coronavirus Economic Response Fund and for related purposes. Third reading, a bill for an act to appropriate additional money out of the Consolidated Revenue Fund for the ordinary annual services of the government in relation to the coronavirus economic response and for related purposes. Third reading, a bill for an act to appropriate additional money out of the Consolidated Revenue Fund for certain expenditure in relation to the coronavirus economic response and for related purposes. Third reading, a bill for an act to provide for a cash flow boost relating to the coronavirus and for related purposes.
Okay. I have received messages from His Excellency the Governor-General recommending, in accordance with Section 56 of the Constitution, appropriations for the purposes of the Supply Bill No. 1 2020 to 2021, the Supply Bill No. 2 2020 to 2021 and the Supply Parliamentary Departments Bill No. 1 2020 to 2021. Call the Minister.
Thanks, Madam Deputy Speaker. I present the Supply Bill number 1, 2021, the Supply Bill number 2, 2021 and the Supply Parliamentary Departments Bill number 1, 2021 and the explanatory memorandum for each of these bills.
The Clerk.
First reading, a bill for an act to appropriate money out of the Consolidated Revenue Fund for the ordinary annual services of the government and for related purposes. A bill for an act to appropriate money out of the Consolidated Revenue Fund for certain expenditure and for related purposes. A bill for an act to appropriate money out of the Consolidated Revenue Fund for expenditure in relation to the parliamentary departments and for related purposes.
The Minister.
Thanks, Madam Deputy Speaker. I move that these bills be now read a second time.
The Minister.
Supply Bill number 1, 2021, together with Supply Bill number 2, 2021 and Supply Parliamentary Departments Bill number 1, 2021, seeks appropriations to facilitate the continuation of normal government business. These bills are necessary to ensure the proper functioning of government services and the continuation of vital programs in an environment of global economic uncertainty resulting from the coronavirus pandemic. This economic uncertainty impacts the forecasts on which the federal budget depends. Consequently, the government has decided to reschedule this year's federal budget to the 6th of October 2020. This will also ensure that the 2021 budget can set out the path to economic recovery. This delay of the budget does not, however, stand in the way of a timely and comprehensive responses to the present health and economic challenges. This week, the government has brought forward a wide-reaching package of legislation, including expenditure, tax relief and streamlined regulatory measures to support its coronavirus economic response. Supply Bill number 1, 2021 provides for appropriations for a proposed expenditure on the ordinary annual services of the government for the first 7 months of 2021. This is slightly longer than the customary 5-month contingency that has been provided in some recent supply bills. In the present uncertain circumstances, it's important that supply arrangements include enough contingency and ensure adequate time for parliamentary scrutiny of appropriation bills. The bill seeks approval for appropriations from the Consolidated Revenue Fund of just over $76.3 billion. The appropriations proposed in this bill are broadly based on 7/12 of the estimated 2021 annual appropriations. The 2021 estimates are largely the 2019-20 base, adjusted for economic and program-specific parameters, and the effect of decisions announced as part of my EFO are included in the 1920 additional estimates appropriations bills, plus of course the COVID-19 related measures. The bill must be passed in this session to ensure funding is available to all entities from 1 July 2020, thereby ensuring the continuity of program and service delivery. The 7/12 allocation are adjusted where necessary for programs or agencies that are expected to face additional pressures in the first 7 months of the financial year. I want to emphasise that this bill seeks provision only to fund government expenditure on an interim basis until the 2021 budget appropriation bills have passed. Therefore, no new measures for the 2021 budget are included in this bill. The bill also provides an advance to the Finance Minister provision of $16 billion to provide the government with the capacity to allocate additional appropriations for urgent and unforeseen expenditure, and this ensures that sufficient appropriations are available to meet unforeseen costs, which may include responding to the need for increased medical services, the need to provide capacity for further economic stimulus should this be required, and to support the ongoing business of government. In light of the size of this, it is proposed to institute additional transparency measures on its use, and this will include a regular media release which reports and reconciles the use of the AFM provision. Details of the proposed expenditure are set out in the schedule to the bill, the EM and the various portfolio statements. Supply Bill number 2, along with Supply Bill number 1 and Supply Parliamentary Departments Bill number 1, seeks appropriations to again facilitate the continuation of normal government business. Supply Bill number 2, 2021 provides for appropriations that are not for the ordinary annual services of government, such as for capital works and services, and for payments to states, territories and local governments for the first 7 months of 2021. The bill seeks approval for appropriations from the Consolidated Revenue Fund of just under $6.7 billion. The appropriations proposed in this bill are broadly based on 7/12 of the estimated 2021 annual appropriations. The 2021 estimates, again, are largely on the 2019 base, adjusted for economic and program-specific parameters and the effect of decisions in MyEFO, or included in the additional estimates appropriation bills, and again, plus the COVID-19 related measures. Again, the 7/12 allocations are adjusted where necessary, where items or organisations are expected to face additional pressures in the first 7 months of the year. For example, further capital funding for the National Medical Stockpile. The supply bills also take into account terminating programs. The bill also establishes the debt limits for 2021 for general purpose financial assistance payments and national partnership payments. The debit limits in the bill reflect a full year of the estimated 2021 limits, so that agreements with other governments can be established with certainty for the full year. The bill must be passed in this session again to ensure funding is available to all entities from the 1st of July 2020, ensuring the continuity of program and service delivery. As with Supply Bill number 1, this bill seeks provision only to fund government expenditure on an interim basis until budget appropriation bills have passed, and therefore no new measures, I emphasise, for the 2020 budget are included in this bill either. The bill also provides an advance to the Finance Minister, a provision of $24 billion to provide the government with the capacity to allocate additional appropriations for urgent and unforeseen expenditure. This ensures that sufficient appropriations are available to meet unforeseen costs, which may include responding to the need for additional and more costly medical equipment driven by international competition, the need to provide capacity for further economic stimulus should that be required, and to support the ongoing business of government. In light of the size of the AFM, it's proposed to institute additional transparency measures on its use, and this again will include a regular media release which reports and reconciles the use of the provision. And again, details of the proposed expenditure are set out in the schedule to the bill, the EM, and the various portfolio statements. Finally, the Supply Parliamentary Departments Bill number 1, 2021, again provides appropriations for the first 7 months of 2021 for the operations of the Department of the Senate, the Department of the House of Representatives, the Department of Parliamentary Services, and the Parliamentary Budget Office. This bill seeks approval for appropriations from the Consolidated Revenue Fund of just over $150 million. The appropriations proposed in this bill are broadly based on, again, 7/12 of the estimated 2021 annual appropriations, which are largely, again, the 1920 base adjusted for economic and program-specific parameters. The bill must be passed in this session to ensure that funding for these vital agencies is available to these departments from the 1st of July, thereby ensuring the continuity of our Parliament's operations. And as with the other supply bills, I want to emphasise that this bill seeks provision only to appropriate money to fund government expenditure on an interim basis until budget appropriations bills have been passed, and again, no measures for the 2020 budget are included in this bill. This arrangement importantly allows for appropriation Parliamentary Departments Bill number 1, 2021, or a similar bill to be passed when Parliament resumes sitting if necessary. And again, Madam Deputy Speaker, details of the proposed expenditure are set out in the schedule to the bill, the EM, and the various 1920 statements, and I therefore commend the bills to the House.
Thank the Minister. In accordance with the resolution agreed to earlier, the question is that these bills be now read a second time, and I'll give the call to the Shadow Treasurer.
Thanks very much, Acting Deputy Speaker, for the opportunity to speak on and support these supply bills. We support them for the usual reasons, but also because in this case and some of the extraordinary measures in there, they are a sensible contingency for the next 7 months to make sure that the usual operations of government can continue, but also so that we can update the advance to the Finance Minister provisions so that we can allow for what are extremely uncertain times when it comes to the provision of public funds over the next little while. As the Minister or Assistant Minister said a moment ago, they provide 7 months of funding for the year, with a couple of exceptions around the National Disability Insurance Agency, full-year funding for Services Australia, the Tax Office and the Health Department, which is obviously crucial right now, and also for the measures specifically associated with the coronavirus response. They appropriate some large sums. Again, that is a sensible contingency given that the position that we find ourselves in. I wanted to speak in a little more detail about the Advance to the Finance Minister provisions, which have existed for some time but which have been updated again in the usual way in the bills that are before us. What the advance does is it allows the Finance Minister to appropriate money in unforeseen circumstances, or when there's otherwise been an error perhaps, or whether there's funding which is supported which has not yet been appropriated in the other ways. And the provisions are usually for a reasonable amount but a modest amount. For example, there was a $295 million advance. There was a $300 million advance in recent times. And what these supply bills are doing, they're proposing that there is a much more substantial advance to the Finance Minister and really an unprecedented amount. And we have supported that on this side of the House, consistent with what we've been saying all day about the other bills, which I was able to talk about at length this morning. We are being as responsible and constructive and supportive as we can be. We recognise that this is not business as usual in the economy, so it shouldn't be business as usual in politics either. And so we have engaged with the government on aspects of these supply bills. I wanted to recognise in particular the work of the Shadow Finance Minister, Katie Gallagher, in the other place, working with her counterpart, Matthias Cormann, the Finance Minister. They have had their heads together for some time on these matters and have been able to negotiate quite effectively. And Senator Gallagher, who is far better as Shadow Finance Minister than her predecessor ever was, has done a great job in securing some commitments from the government. And they've been mentioned by the Minister opposite in his contribution a moment ago. For example, when the government uses the advance provisions, they now need to issue a press release so that there is some transparency involved in that after every single use of the advance. Secondly, if there's an advance greater than $1 billion, then it requires the approval from the opposition via Senator Gallagher and the other place, and some sort of exchange of letters so that that is approved by us. You can imagine lots of circumstances, unfortunately, in the current climate, where there might need to be a big health expenditure. If it's more than $1 billion, Senator Cormann would write to Senator Gallagher, they would exchange letters quickly and the advance could take place. But we think that's an important step to take, given the magnitude of the money involved here, that there is that extra layer of agreement and consultation between the government and the opposition. And we think that those measures together will enhance transparency and scrutiny, and we think it will improve the process of relying on that advance, particularly now when there is so much focus on what else we might need to do, whether it be in health spending or other types of spending to help Australians get through a very difficult period. I just wanted to touch on one other issue, Acting Deputy Speaker, before I conclude. As I said, I had an opportunity earlier on today to talk about the broader economic stimulus measures. So I just wanted to add one more point. In addition to the agreement that's been struck between the government and the opposition on the additional transparency for this advance mechanism, we do think it's important that the government consider more than they have to this point, releasing some kind of updated economic forecasts and budget forecasts. We do understand, and we said publicly on the day that the government announced that they wanted to push the budget back, we said at the time, we understand that there are severe workforce issues in the Commonwealth Treasury and the Finance Department. We are cognisant of those. And when the government pushed back the budget to October, we said, look, we recognise that there are issues there and that it would be difficult to do a full comprehensive budget on the original time frame. But at the same time, we do think it would be very important to not keep the Australian people in the dark for the 10 months between the mid-year update last December and the budget in this coming October. We need Australian businesses and the broader Australian community to know what the Commonwealth Treasury thinks is going to happen in the economy and in the budget. This is crucial. We can't have people in the dark for such a long period about what the Treasury thinks. And one of my concerns here is, it's not a partisan point, it's not a heavily political argument that we're having, and I've engaged with the Treasurer on it, I've engaged with the Treasury Secretary, we had the opportunity to engage with the Prime Minister on it in the Cabinet room yesterday. I just think it's really important that the vacuum is not filled in the absence of credible Treasury forecasts. We don't want to see the vacuum filled by all kinds of other guesstimates and have to rely on those. We want the professionalism of the Commonwealth Treasury applied to giving the Australian people, Australian businesses, decision makers in the economy of all kinds, the capacity to know what the Treasury thinks is happening here. The regular monthly updates in the budget are not enough, they're backward looking. We need a forward-looking sense of what's happening in the budget and what's happening in the economy. So ideally, as part of the constructive process that has happened here to agree these supply bills and the advance to the Finance Minister provisions, ideally the government would also reconsider their position on providing other kinds of forecasts as well, so that people can have a sense of what the Treasury thinks about the state of the economy and the state of the budget. But Acting Deputy Speaker, that doesn't prevent us from supporting, as I said, these supply bills for all the usual reasons, but also the additional reasons of urgency and uncertainty right now. We're pleased to do so. We thank Senator Cormann and Senator Gallagher for their negotiations that led to this outcome. And other colleagues, no doubt, will avail themselves of the opportunity to speak about the supply bills, but also the coronavirus measures more broadly.
I thank the member. I'll just have a message if the member can just resume his seat. I have received a message from His Excellency the Governor-General recommending, in accordance with Section 56 of the Constitution, an appropriation for the purposes of amendments moved by a Minister to the Coronavirus Economic Response Package Omnibus Bill 2020. The question before the Chair is that this bill be now read a second time, and I give the call to the member for Lalor.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. And Deputy Speaker, I'm pleased to rise today to avail myself as an opportunity to speak on the supply bills, but as the member for Rankin has just outlined, to take that opportunity to make some points around the COVID-19 bills that preceded it in today's chamber. As we've seen many times today, the Leader of the Opposition and the Shadow Treasurer have said the opposition will continue to work constructively with the government and ensure passage of this legislation to keep Australians in work going forward, and the passage of bills today to ensure that we keep Australians in work. Labor's priority is to protect lives and to protect jobs, to help Australian workers, businesses, families and communities through this difficult time and ensure vulnerable Australians are supported and their health protected. We understand people are anxious at the moment, which is why Labor will continue to be supportive, responsible and constructive, and that means injecting a sense of urgency where we see it lacking or absent. My contribution today, I want to take some time out to speak specifically about the aged care sector and some of the government's initiatives in the aged care sector, because I want to put on record our thanks and our concerns for actions taken and actions that we see need to be taken. And I'll begin by putting on the record our thanks and gratitude to many of our aged care workforce. This period of time has been tough and will continue to be so. But the work you're doing to help those with this virus poses the biggest risk is remarkable and invaluable. We also know the work you are doing is demanding and challenging. Be assured we are thinking of you all at this time, and Labor will continue to support aged care workers through these challenging times. We welcome the government's announcement regarding COVID-19 support for aged care and older Australians. We appreciate the government has taken up some of Labor's proposals to support the aged care industry and assist and protect older Australians. It is vitally important that aged care workers are supported at this time. They are on the front line of our nation's efforts to flatten the curve and to save lives. In saying this, we still have a number of concerns. I spoke to the member for Newcastle last night who had spoken to aged care facilities in her electorate. I spoke to the member for Franklin, the Shadow Minister, today, who had similarly phoned into aged care, residential aged care in her electorate, and my office this morning spoke to one of our local residential aged care providers, and the news from them was not fabulous, particularly around the stimulus package. This particular provider locally made the decision to go into total lockdown last night. Whilst they've been diligent, they feel that they are unable to control people who visit who may have had contact with the virus, and so have taken that action. They've had some people tested during this process because people had shown symptoms, and they'd had a visitor whose partner was isolating. They've set up FaceTime and Skype for residents to maintain contact with loved ones. I would urge the government at this point in time to do more to support other aged care providers to ensure that they can similarly keep family members in contact with aged care residents while they're in isolation. They've also set up one room accessible without entering any other room in the facility for end-of-life situations. They experience big problems with supplies. Prices have soared, they're saying, on everything, and deliveries have gone from 24 to 48 hours to 2 weeks. They have no face masks at all. They've contacted the government medical supply and got an email back saying that they've been inundated with orders, and there's nothing since. Their food portions have had to be reduced due to the delivery situation, and they've had to change to a basic menu as many items are not available. They order through a wholesaler. Stocks of required items such as incontinent pads, toilet paper and bath sheets are extremely low, so they have had to change their practices around that. And as far as the stimulus is concerned, they think they might be eligible but have no idea how much they would get, because they'd have to wait until their next BAS statement to get any real indication. I would urge the government to show much more urgency in this space. As comforting it is for the families of these residents in this particular facility, other family members need to know that they're going to be able to Skype to be able to talk to residents in aged care. And we'd urge the government to do more to assist in that area. We'd urge the government to do more to assist, having looked at the package of support for aged care workers. We would urge you to do more to give reassurance that all aged care workers will have the protective personal equipment that they need, and that if they get sick, they will be paid. These are the assurances that we need to see from government immediately. And Deputy Speaker, we welcome other measures that the government has taken, one of which is the expansion of Meals on Wheels. We welcome this inclusion. We've always acknowledged the important work they do, and we welcome what the government's doing in that space. However, we heard in Senate question time from Aged Care Minister Richard Colbeck today that 10 aged care residents and 7 workers have tested positive for COVID-19. This is the news that I know that I have been dreading since this emergency began, because it signals what we all know, and that is that the spread of the COVID-19 will be very difficult to slow once it reaches aged care residents. So it is incredibly sad today that that milestone has occurred today, but it adds the urgency the government needs to take to ensure that where aged care residences like my local one that have only had negative testing done, they know they're safe now. They need to know they can continue to be safe, and they need government support to ensure that. Deputy Speaker, I'd like to make a few comments too about what's going on in my electorate and about the government's general stimulus response and the plans. And I'd want to put on the record that I have concerns that the coronavirus supplement may not be available for some Australian families struggling to put food on the table, particularly given there's been no change to the income test. That is of critical concern. I've said from the outset that this health crisis and necessary government action to limit its spread meaning an economic downturn, would shed a light on the fundamental changes that have occurred across our society in work. The insecure nature, the casualisation. My electorate is ground zero for those changes that have occurred across the last decade of our industrial relations environment. And the Centrelink queues today are part of that realisation. I know that Australians will be shocked tonight when they sit down to watch the news and see those Centrelink queues around the country. This is another part that we have all been dreading but knew was coming. I'm grateful that the government has put some things in place, but I want to highlight a few things that I'd like to see more action taken on. And one of those, in an electorate like mine, is around our New Zealand citizens who've been paying taxes in this country for many, many years, but who at the moment don't have access to Centrelink the way other Australians do if and when they lose their jobs, when things slow down and they've got no shifts and workplaces close. I also want to highlight that I have 50 asylum seekers in my electorate who are currently not eligible for any benefits because they haven't managed to get onto the safe haven visa. These 50 individuals will need support. I'd also like to highlight the number of international students I have in my electorate and the fact that they will find work much, much more difficult to get as they go online for their studies if they're higher education students. I'd like to highlight that for the government to consider. I would also highlight, of course, the number of sole traders that I have in my electorate. They are feeling abandoned. They want me to say so in this place, and so I take the opportunity to do so today. Many have said they don't want to access their superannuation. They want real government support so that at the end of this bridge that the government is talking about, their business can be reignited. And I want to talk to the young people in my electorate and to electorates across the country. One of the things that schools spend countless hours on are the things that are never tested. Schools teach socialisation well beyond the preparatory years. We work with young people, helping them to develop impulse control. We work with them developing pro-social behaviours. We work with them on their creativity, and we work with them on their mental health. And I want to send a message to the young people who will be finishing school in Victoria to go on holidays as of tomorrow. Remember to self-monitor your impulse control and your mental well-being. Continue to talk to your friends and to trusted adults. We need to think carefully and clearly about those you love and help us to minimise the spread of this virus. Think about your grandparents. Think about the vulnerable people who live near you or attend school with you. Think about the people who are already in hospital needing support, and stay home. When you want to go out, remember them and instead Skype a friend. Organise an online group chat. You are incredibly creative individuals. Find ways to connect. You are the most tech-savvy generation that we have seen. We know you can do this. Please reach out to one another, look after one another's mental health, and continue to find ways to connect. I want to thank all of the teachers in my local community who've been working so tirelessly to support our students, particularly in Victoria. I know how hard they've been working on getting the online environment ready for students beyond this school holiday break so that their learning can continue. I want to thank them for the time they've spent. I want to stress to the government that the banks and the mortgage suspension of payments is very, very welcome, but please, banks, don't create caveats that lock out the vulnerable. And I'd ask the government to look at people in communities like mine that might be with the smaller credit unions and therefore won't have access to the big four banks and their notions of mortgage suspension. I suppose what I'm asking for is to look at the margins, to the people who are living in those margins, many of whom live in electorates like mine. When I tell stories of our electorate, I often reference the important role schools, sporting teams, clubs and associations and community organisations have in building community, of them being the glue that binds us. Without these, over the next few weeks and months, being in our daily lives, things will be difficult. I encourage all to find ways, like I did the young people, to stay connected to your sporting teams, to your concert band, to your school teachers, to the things that bind us together. And I want to alert my community to the great work being done by Wyndham City Council in preparation. They are leading in in Victoria in some of the things they are putting into place. So if you don't already, like the Wyndham City Council Facebook page so you know what's going on in our local community, like my social pages, like my Facebook page so you can keep up, like our state members' Facebook pages so that you can keep up. We promise that we will continue to put out information that we hope will be helpful. And finally, I want to say we're encouraging everybody to be online, kids included. I am actively doing that. But please, don't share things that are not real. We've seen in the last 48 hours a terrible story being shared that the Victorian Police have said is absolutely not true. Absolutely not true. We need to look after one another at this time. We need to reach out to one another, without touching, of course. We need to reach out virtually to one another to ensure that what binds us together keeps us together through this. The queues at Centrelink need to be calm. People can use MyGov. We'll get through these processes, I'm sure. If you haven't already registered for MyGov, then across the next 48 hours, please do. Even if you don't think you need it yet, you may yet need it in the coming weeks, and not lining up at Centrelink and being able to do it online will certainly be easier. My office is there to help the people in our community. As we push through, particularly around Centrelink issues, we'll be there to assist. Please don't hesitate to ring the office. We are still answering the phone, and we will continue to do so. I think that's it, other than to suggest to this government, Deputy Speaker, we have a pattern of making announcements, but the implementation is what matters. Please don't make announcements that confuse, that promise but won't deliver in a timely way. Resource your commitments, back up the announcements with action. Don't suggest one thing without guaranteeing it, like the business support that is based on staff but which give no guarantees will be spent on staff. Please don't create that division between worker and employer. Don't create a scenario where the worker will blame their employer if they don't manage to get that money to them. The government needs to think seriously. Please, the last thing we need from this government is a sense that we are pitching one Australian against another. It is not what we need. We need exactly the opposite, and I hope today we've demonstrated our ability to do that in this place, and that that's transferred to my community and communities across the country. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.
I thank the honourable member for Lawler. The question is that these bills be now read a second time, and I call the honourable member for Macon.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. And Australia, along with the rest of the world, is facing a global health crisis. It's a deadly pandemic that has already taken several thousand lives. So our first priority, of course, should be and must be to save lives. There will be an economic fallout because of it, and this package that's been brought to the Parliament attempts to deal with that. But can I say, Mr Deputy Speaker, the most effective economic action we can take is to control and eliminate COVID-19. If Australia ever needed leadership, it is now. Across the world and here in Australia, people are facing uncertainty, turmoil and life-threatening risks, which creates fear and panic, and we have seen that and spoken about it in debates today. Most people have never experienced anything like this or close to it in their lifetime. Without warning, normality as we have come to know it, simple things that we took for granted have abruptly come to an end, at least for now, and in some cases possibly forever. COVID-19 will indeed change how we live and how we think into the future. Very few, if any, parts of society will not be affected in one way or another, and in some cases drastically affected. Some sectors will fare better than others. However, in a globalised world, the fallout will indeed be far and wide. And people are therefore looking for governments for leadership. This should be a time when political differences are set aside and we work for the betterment of the people that we all represent, where opinions, regardless of where they come from, are respectfully debated and new ideas candidly and openly considered. Where, for example, work and study for home may become a way of life for people into the future, where Australia's reliance on overseas countries for basic needs is no longer acceptable, and greater effort should be made to rebuild our manufacturing sector, and where identified gaps in our health system are rectified. Mr. Deputy Speaker, this should also be a time that, as a nation, we reassess our strengths, our vulnerabilities, and our place in a global future. The stimulus package before us and other government COVID-19 response measures should not solely be measures to minimise the damage, care for the immediate needs and restore normality, but the package should simultaneously better prepare Australia for a more secure future. Whilst for years the spotlight and the public debate has been on climate change, the rising influence of China, or perhaps another global financial recession, the world ignored the obvious and profound global risks of a world overly connected and overly interdependent. COVID-19 has exposed the vulnerabilities of globalisation, vulnerabilities of globalisation and open borders that the global free market advocates and power-hungry transnationals have relentlessly pursued for decades. COVID-19 has made a difference to the thinking of people right around the world. I note that in the midst of COVID-19, many of the big corporates are now showing compassion and social responsibility that was previously unseen. I welcome that. However, the rich and powerful also know that their own survival depends on the survival of the masses from whom their wealth is generated. Self-interest is a powerful force. COVID-19 brings home many realities now acknowledged in the stimulus package and other government response measures. It's also an opportunity to rethink long-standing societal norms and open doorways to innovation. The financial stimulus measures acknowledge that economies are indeed much stronger when poorer or low-income people have more money to spend. That governments, and in Australia's case through the Reserve Bank, should rightfully be in the banking business. That New Start is and has been inadequate, and it makes economic sense to increase it. But Mr. Deputy Speaker, the kinds of measures that the government has brought forward in all of its packages are measures that some of us in this place have been calling for a long time, because it's in the national interest to do so. It is good, and it's indeed heartening to see that the government has embraced those ideas for the very same reason that it now understands that it is good, and it is in the national interest, and it is in the economic interest of the nation to do all of those things. It always has been. But for reasons that I could never fathom, the government chose to do differently. Can I say what this issue also exposes is that we need to, as a nation, stop continuing to be reliant on overseas countries for basic everyday needs that people in this country need. And the loss of manufacturing in this country is a great example where here and now we have short supplies of many things that are essential to our needs, but which we have to rely on overseas countries for, and which should otherwise have been produced here in Australia. We need to get back to being a country that makes things so that at times like this, we can indeed do that, just as we did in the World War II years with our manufacturing sector. It applies right across the board to everything we need, that it doesn't make sense to leave yourself vulnerable to other countries when, for one reason or another, you can't get those products immediately as you need them. And at a time that we need innovation, this is the time when, had we had that capacity, we might have been able to innovate. Can I say in respect to that, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I certainly commend the health researchers we have in this country who have always shown leadership and continue to do so with respect to much of the work that I'm aware that is going on with respect to looking for some solutions and perhaps some medicines that will assist with the COVID-19 problem, not just here but right across the world. But again, that's the kind of thing that every country should be getting prepared to do. Mr Deputy Speaker, in the course of the last few weeks, my office has been contacted by many, many people with all kinds of suggestions and in some cases problems. And I want to touch briefly on some of those issues because they haven't all been addressed within this package. The first relates to that one of the ironies of this very package is that the very businesses and enterprises that we are trying to assist by way of a stimulus package will not be able to be assisted because, on the other hand, we have set in place regulations which close them down. So the very small businesses that would otherwise have looked forward to a stimulus package and were very much supported by the stimulus package of the Rudd-Gillard years will not be able to benefit from it because they are no longer able to trade because of the restriction of people movement across the country. That happens to be something that concerns me because I would have thought that one of the things that we're trying to do is keep those businesses afloat, yet at the same time we're telling them they have to close down for good reason, and I understand that, but they will miss out on the very benefits of the stimulus package. Amongst those are sole traders and many small and family business operators, particularly in the tourism and hospitality sector. And we've seen that through the announcement last night that for many of those, they'll have to close their doors. And for many of those small business operators, they will be hit extremely hard. And as I say, whilst they might be able to access other government support, and I'm not sure just who will be and who won't be because there's obviously qualifications with respect to all of that, the fact is that the stimulus package won't help them at all because their doors are shut. Along with that, I've also had representation made to me by several people with respect to heartless landlords who will not show any compassion at a time that they should and continue to charge the full rental rates that they do when the reality is that it's in their own long-term interest to show a little bit of goodwill at this time and perhaps lower their rental charges. And I would urge landlords across Australia, and I know that many of them have done that, and I commend them for doing so, but those who haven't done it, I would urge them to rethink their position and assist their tenants by doing that. We also have, and I've been contacted by several people who are either overseas or who have family members overseas who are trying to desperately get back home. Those people are stuck in countries where the borders have been closed, even in those countries, particularly in some of the South American countries, and cannot get out. I urge the government to do what it can to assist them and facilitate their return back to Australia. I'm sure if it was any one of our family members of those of us that are in this parliament, we would want to see them brought home as quickly as possible. And I realise it's a big task. I realise that at any one time there are hundreds of thousands of people overseas. But for those who are caught in a country where they can't get out and they've asked for consular assistance and government assistance, I urge the government to do whatever it can. Along with that, Mr Deputy Speaker, one of the issues that truly concerns me, and I know it concerns everyone else in this place, is the panic buying that we have seen. And whilst it's unnecessary, the reality is that fear causes people to do that. When people walk into grocery stores and see the shelves empty, then of course if they can buy something that they think that they will need next week and the week after, they would do so as well. The problem, however, is that people who need essential goods and items and who are not panic buying then go into the grocery stores, and I've had one case where a person has gone in on 4 different occasions in all the stores in his locality and has not been able to buy essential supplies for his household. This is an elderly couple. So my request to the government is to look at what other measures it can bring in to try and ensure that panic buying is controlled. It will be in everyone's interest if we were able to do that. And finally, in respect to the issues that I believe could be looked at even further, my view is that local governments across the country could do a little more as well. Local governments are one level of government that have a very secure income stream. And at times like this, when they can also borrow at very low interest rates, they should be doing that and bringing forward their own capital works so that that would keep people employed, because at the interest rates that they can borrow, it would make sense to do works that you know have to be done down the track in any event, even if it means you have to borrow the money. Because when you're borrowing at literally no interest, there's no reason why you shouldn't be doing that, and I urge local government to do so. I also urge local government to consider how they might also provide rate relief to some of those businesses that are going to find it difficult in the weeks and months ahead. Lastly, Mr Deputy Speaker, I too want to thank the many people out there who have, over the last few weeks, worked tirelessly to assist the community get through this. And I'm referring to the health workers, wherever they might be, pharmacies, who I know have also been put under incredible pressure to provide assistance, the retail grocery workers who every day are dealing with, in some cases, unhappy customers and the like, but doing their best to try and provide services, the aged care workers that others have spoken about, and of course the teachers who have also been working through this in a way that others perhaps haven't. And sometimes it seems to me that we take teachers for granted, that we treat them as nothing more than babysitters or childminders, when the truth is they are educators. That's their first and foremost responsibility, to be educators. And they have also been working, in many cases, with uncertainty hanging over their head, but also in conditions that others might have said, I don't want to work in those conditions. Mr Deputy Speaker, Labor has made it clear we will support these packages, regardless of perhaps any criticism I might have made about their shortfalls and others have made, and regardless of whether we could do more. The fact is we need to provide that support as soon as possible, and we will be supporting these measures.
I thank the honourable member for Macon. The question is that these bills being now read a second time, and I call the honourable member for Perth.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Like all Australians right now, I feel scared and anxious about what's happening in our country. It's okay to feel scared. I'm not afraid to say I worry about my community of Perth, including my family, my friends, my neighbours, and what the world looks like for my son and for thousands of local kids once this is all over. But it's how we act on those feelings that matters most. We should act out of hope that we can get through this, not fear that drives selfishness and meaningless panic. You don't need to be a vaccine scientist to know that you can turn fear very effectively into purpose and compassion. And Australians are reminded afresh that we are citizens of the world and we are all in this together. In my electorate of Perth, at the very heart of it stands Block C of the Royal Perth Hospital, built in response to the Spanish flu. Today, Royal Perth Hospital is the heart of the testing for WA's response to the coronavirus. I want to say thank you to every health worker, from the catering staff that work in the basement of that beast of a hospital, to the cleaners who keep it clean and healthy, and to every medical professional. I also want to thank everyone for turning up to work to support their fellow Australians. Community and personal service workers, some 7,996 in the Perth electorate. Retail and sales staff, some 6,096 in the Perth electorate. Health workers, 3,183 in the Perth electorate. And at the last census stats, there were 3,147 hospitality workers. And I know that today there are not that many hospitality workers. It is a very tough day for those who work in some of those industries. I want to acknowledge the leadership of WA Premier Mark McGowan and the Deputy Premier Roger Cook, and indeed commend them for opening new coronavirus clinics in Armidale, Rockingham, Joondalup and Midland this week. They've been clear and compassionate in their communication, and they've put the interests of Western Australians, and therefore the interests of all Australians, first. I'm proud to be a West Australian voice in this parliament, but I acknowledge that there are fewer Western Australian voices in this parliament this week because of the limitations that we have had to go through. I thank the whips and I thank everyone who has made arrangements so that we can have some voices, but this is not a parliament of all voices as it normally is. Yesterday, before flying to Canberra, I got coffee from Miller and Baker, one of hundreds of great cafes in Perth. They only opened their business in December. I said to the owners that we'd be passing some legislation to help their cash flow. Without missing a beat, they responded, "What about our casual staff?" That sort of compassion is what we need from every employer in the country right now. Today, businesses across my electorate and across every electorate in the country are closing. For me, it's the Court, Pika Bar, the Inglewood Hotel, our local, the Rosemount, just to name a few. But unlike Blockbuster Video, they are not closed forever. They will reopen. But for these businesses, for their staff, these are going to be the longest months of their life. Just a month ago, Perth was buzzing with the Fringe Festival. I'm now being flooded by emails from people who are saying, "What's next?" Even indeed saying, "I've lost my job, but what can I do to help?" This is the most uncertain of times for so many people. But I do want to particularly mention those in the creative and performing arts. I got an email from Paul in Mount Lawley, who works in the arts industry, who said he's been watching this very closely. The I Lost My Gig counter is now noting that some $280 million of work, 255,000 gig event cancellations and counting. So it is incredibly tough times. But we need everyone in this parliament to do their job and to do it well. In that spirit, every Australian needs the Prime Minister to do well now. I want him and his team to be incredibly successful in battling this virus. People's lives do rest on them making the right decision each day after day after day. And if we think about the lessons of our recent history of the global financial crisis, this parliament saw too much immature behaviour from too many members too often, and some of that carried on for too long, in my view. The government should reflect on the fortune they have to have someone like Anthony Albanese, the Leader of the Opposition, as the Opposition Leader at a time like this. A decent person, a true parliamentarian, someone who was Leader of the House during that global financial crisis and has shown today that Labor and he has learnt those lessons. Someone who knows that our work ultimately in this place is in the service of all Australians. A friend said to me this morning, and I'm going to steal his quote and half reference it. "We don't have a cure for this virus, but we do have the medicine of kindness, compassion and hope." I think that is a really smart way of summing up what we can and what we can't do right now. We have kindness, and in that spirit I'd like to thank some of those who teach kindness at the earliest years, the early childhood educators who work just as hard and are in just as difficult a position as our teachers and teachers' assistants. We have compassion. We know that racism will never be a sustainable economic strategy. And we have hope, because so many people in this place, and indeed Australians, all 25 million of them, have in some time in their lives overcome great personal crisis and come out stronger the other side. We are experiencing, as many have said, a health and an economic crisis. But sadly, natural disasters will not take a break while we battle the coronavirus. We've heard briefings that domestic violence will get worse, as will homelessness. And as the Leader of the Opposition said, it's pretty hard to self-isolate if you're homeless. I note that what the Mayor of London has done today is coordinate with the International Hotels Group to provide homes for some 300 homeless people in London. I think that was a very smart move and something that we should look at here in Australia. And we think globally, there are thousands who cannot apply the social distancing and isolation that is required to contain this virus. My fear is that over time, over this year, we have a risk that this health and economic crisis becomes a democratic and international security crisis. We must maintain our belief in democracy. We must continue to practice democracy. If for just one day Australia sends a message to our neighbours across the world that democracy is optional, we will encourage a security crisis. We've seen warnings also on cybersecurity with these rapidly changing working arrangements. These are serious warnings too, and we need to keep our international institutions talking. It was the G20 that helped us through the global financial crisis. We now need the World Health Organization to be more successful than it has ever been in its history. When we return to a normal sitting schedule, I hope that some of the constructive tone of today remains. The members of this Parliament must also come with a comprehensive plan for the recovery phase. We are going to be given a bit of time to think about that with some of our other duties being lightened. So it's important that we actually have that comprehensive plan in place. How we rebuild to have thriving small businesses, return to a world full of joy, performing arts and culture, a normal education system. We will have no excuse. The hard thinking, long-term planning must be done now. If that involves new ideas, new ways of thinking, new ways of working together, we should do it, because that's the only way that we can rebuild a fairer and stronger community than the one we had before this horrible virus. Thank you.
I thank the honourable member for Perth. The question is that these bills be now read a second time, and I call the honourable member for Macquarie.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker, and I rise to speak on the supply bill and address the challenging times that we now face. There is no better indication of the desperation that people are feeling in my electorate than the queues that have formed outside Centrelink offices today and the emails and messages that I'm getting from people who need financial support now. It's our job here in this place, in fact, it's our obligation to pass legislation that provides the necessary support so that people's immediate financial needs are met, so that they can focus on what really matters right now, and that is protecting themselves and their families from the health risk that this virus presents. Coronavirus is first and foremost a health risk. So let's make sure that people are not forced to choose between their health and their finances. And we need to do this swiftly. And we will continue to ask the government to consider the extra steps that we recommend be taken to protect people's financial situations as we go through these very challenging months ahead. For my community, it comes on top of bushfires, and we were barely able to start the recovery before this double financial whammy happened. Our economy was sluggish before the fires, shattered by the fires, and now it's even tougher for businesses to withstand the current situation. The $10,000 bushfire grants that we fought for are proving useful for many businesses, but there are others still waiting to see if they're eligible. And I'd encourage all businesses in the Blue Mountains and Hawkesbury who were affected by fires and smoke to investigate that grant. And so to the new measures that have been passed. We welcome the significant increase in job seeker allowance through the $550 a fortnight coronavirus supplement, the waiving of the assets test and the waiving of waiting times. But April the 27th is too far away. The queues and the crashing of MyGov website shows just how great the need is right now. The second one-off $750 payment to many Social Security, veteran and other income support recipients, including pension, is also welcome, but again, it's being paid in July. That is too far away. The further reduction of the deeming rates to 0.25% at the lower rate and 2.25% as the upper rate is also welcome, but I'm not sure why it has to wait till May. It's concerning that there are no changes for the job seeker payment income test, and I've been answering many questions about this afternoon. It means that singles with an income above $542 a week and couples with an income above $993.50 per week will not be eligible for any payments, even if a member of that couple has lost their job, lost their business, or their hours have been substantially reduced. In two-income families, when one person loses their job, they are going to be at risk of missing out because the threshold is low. And while I welcome that it's been extended to people who've been stood down on no pay, to contractors and to sole traders, the failure to change that requirement is going to mean many people miss out on support, as do students and disability pension holders. For sole traders, who make up a huge number of businesses in my electorate, there are enormous uncertainties. Not only do they need to replace the income that they generate for themselves through their business, but they may have to keep paying rent and keep their premises ready to reopen when that is eventually allowed. Businesses who are franchised wonder if they can get relief from those payments. What access will these organisations have for loans? Will they qualify for any extra payments? So for sole traders, this is still a time of great uncertainty, and there is definitely more that can be done to support them. The arts sector, the musicians, the actors, the set designers, the directors, the roadies, the dancers, singers, the painters and sculptors, the filmmakers, they have had the rug pulled from under them. Their existence was already precarious. Now their income is non-existent. This industry needs something extra to give these amazing people some hope that their sector will be viable when this whole thing is over, that theatres will reopen, that venues will function again. Travel agents, the one who've been frantically fielding calls from their customers to ask questions, to cancel bookings, to seek help in getting back to Australia, to deal with the disappointments about not getting all their money back, and the agents who are watching commissions that were in the door go out the door, they need more help. Hotel operators, all the organisations now closed, the gyms, the bars, the hotels, the nightclubs, the massage therapists and hairdressers who've already, assessing the risk, stopped their work. They all need more. I think what's really frustrating is that based on the announcements on Friday, a lot of businesses like the Archbold Hotel in Kurrajong Heights went to enormous lengths to quickly meet those requirements and educate customers, only to be told yesterday, 2 days later, that a large part of their business actually had to close. Small businesses who were doing the right thing are now looking at a very different future. And they're adapting fast to takeaway and deliveries, suggesting that FPOS fees be dropped so people switch to only tapping, being creative with how they minimise contact with customers. Now, we must continue to find ways to help these businesses survive. I also want to talk about teachers. My electorate of Macquarie has a greater number of teachers than any other electorate. School teachers in all sectors, TAFE teachers, early childhood teachers, university lecturers, we abound with them. Teachers at school, in childcare centres and TAFE are being asked to shoulder an enormous responsibility right now and make invidious choices. Many are older, they're grandparents themselves, and in the category considered a higher risk of being more profoundly affected by the coronavirus. Others have their own children, and while they're teaching, they must send their own kids to school or preschool. Now, none of this is ideal, and the confusion of the messages about who should and shouldn't go to school is causing huge anxiety for teachers and parents. I want to thank schools in my electorate, schools like Richmond North Public and Warramoo Public, who have sent parents very clear letters saying things like the advice from the New South Wales government is to keep children at home where it is possible to do so. If you can do this, you're encouraged to do so. That sort of message to parents will make their choices easier. I think if we feel it's a good idea for schools in one state to close, or encourage parents to keep their children at home if they can in another state, it's hard to understand why collectively we haven't gone further. If it's a good thing to do next week, it's a very good thing to do this week. Health should come first. And what heroes our health workers are, the thousands of them in the Blue Mountains and the Hawkesbury. Every single one of them deserves a medal for the work they're doing now and the work we know we're going to ask them to do over the next few months. Just to finish, I'm pleased to see that many of our suggestions around aged care workers and the aged care sector have been adopted. This is a sector that is going to have a really tough time, and they will need all the help they can get. On older people and the changes to deeming rates for pensions, another very welcome thing. But I have to say I'm concerned about encouraging people to sell down their superannuation, younger people to access their super and sell it down at a low point in the market, yet at the same time we're allowing retirees not to do that because we don't want them selling down at the low point in the market. So I see a contradiction there, and I'm disappointed that we haven't been able to refine that. Look, we have supported the package that's passed. We have not supported the package because it's perfect. We haven't supported it because it's enough. We haven't supported it because there aren't more things that we can do, because there are. We're supporting it because we're a responsible opposition. We do need to work together, and we are willing to compromise and work together. We're supporting it because it's urgent and it's needed. But I hope the government puts actions to its words, that there is more to do, because there is, and that everyone, as we proceed through the next few months, shows kindness and compassion and does everything they can to be a good neighbour.
I thank the honourable member for Macquarie. The question is that these bills be now read a second time, and I call the honourable member for Kingsford Smith.
Speaker, the coronavirus poses an unprecedented challenge for Australians, for local communities and for our nation. But we will get through this if we all work together and we all do our bit to stop the spread of the virus. This is an enormous challenge to our healthcare system and those that work in it, and I want to give a very, very big thank you to all of those, every single person who's working in the Australian healthcare sector at the moment, in particular those that are working at the Prince of Wales Hospital in Randwick, in my community, which has a coronavirus testing centre. Thank you for your courage, for your commitment to helping others and saving lives. I want to particularly pay tribute to those on the front line, especially our doctors and our nurses who are triaging, testing and treating patients for coronavirus. Thank you to the cleaners who are making sure that our hospitals and our GP centres are clean and are saving lives as well. All of those who are risking their health to save others are true heroes, and we thank you. And I want to call on the government to ensure that all healthcare professionals have the resources they need to do their job, particularly testing kits, telehealth measures, and I know the government announced something on that today, which is welcomed, adequate thermometers for testing of temperatures, particularly in hospitals, and of course, personal protective equipment. Now, Speaker, many Australians are confused by the government's response to this pandemic because of the situation with schools. This morning there was mass confusion amongst parents and teachers about the situation relating to Australian schools because there is no consistent position from Australian government on the issue at the moment, and it's simply not good enough. Last night we had the Prime Minister in his press conference saying that schools would remain open. This morning the Victorian Premier came out and said that Victorian schools would close from tomorrow. Then, literally half an hour after that press conference, the New South Wales Premier did a press conference indicating that if you could, you should keep your kids at home, but schools would be open and students would be able to go there, but they won't be taught, they'll just be supervised in online activities. Well, Mr. Speaker, our teachers are not babysitters. They deserve better. Parents deserve better from this government in a time of crisis. They deserve a consistent message. And I call on the Prime Minister and the state and territory leaders and those advising them to work together on a unified, consistent message when it comes to schools. The same goes for childcare centres. Many childcare centres are confused about whether or not they should close or whether or not they should remain open, and indeed what that means for payments into the future. Many parents are wondering whether or not they voluntarily keep their kids out of childcare centres, and the uncertainty about payments in respect of support that goes to parents for childcare as well. We need to sort these issues out and sort them out quickly in respect of schools and childcare centres. Now, this virus will of course have a dramatic effect on the Australian economy, on workers and their families, on businesses, particularly small businesses and sole traders. And I've spoken to many workers who have been stood down or sacked, to small businesses who are finding it almost impossible to keep staff on and to keep the doors open. Now, I know that you are deeply worried and concerned. I know that you are hurting, and I want you to know that my office, my staff and I are here to help you. And if you have any issues relating to the economic package that's been announced by the government, please feel free to call my office. And the government has announced a series of stimulus measures aimed at supporting workers, businesses and welfare recipients. And in the interests of the nation, to ensure that these measures pass the Parliament, Labor will immediately work to ensure that the funds flow to Australians as quickly as possible by voting to support these bills. So Labor will be supporting these bills. Are they adequate? No, they are not. Do they start soon enough? No, they do not. Would Labor have done things differently? Absolutely, yes, we would. But in the interest of getting this money out the door and ensuring that Australian workers and businesses get the support they need, we will support these bills. Now, we have concerns with some of the issues and some of the elements of these bills. For instance, they don't start early enough. The $550 per fortnight coronavirus supplement that was announced yesterday doesn't begin until the 27th of April next month. That is too late. It is not soon enough for people that need support immediately. The income test for the job seeker allowance is still in place, meaning that many Australian workers, sole traders and contractors who are stood down or have lost their jobs will not be eligible, particularly if their partner maintains an income. This will leave millions of Australian households struggling to pay their bills and to make ends meet. Now, Deputy Speaker, these are unique circumstances. This is not a situation that Australia has ever found itself in before. And the government should be relaxing such tests that restrict Australians whose jobs and family incomes are at risk and will suffer because of coronavirus. Labor did a similar thing in relaxing those restrictions during the global financial crisis, and it worked. And we call on the government to do a similar thing now. Now, well, of course, today we're seeing, as a result of the mass layoffs and stand down of employees, queues outside of Centrelink offices, and unfortunately many of those that are queuing are going to be disappointed because of some of those restrictions that have been put in place by this government and that remain, and that should be looked at being lifted. I want to thank all of the Centrelink workers who are doing an amazing job, I know, today, who have been under very difficult circumstances working through and ensuring that people get the support that they need. But we should be supporting them, and the government should be providing personal protective equipment for those workers as well. As a result of many workers being stood down or losing their jobs, there will be many that will be unable to pay their mortgage or their rent. And I note that the Australian Bankers Association made some announcements last week about mortgages, particularly the major banks offering mortgage deferrals and hardships arrangements. And I welcome those announcements. But the critical issue with respect to mortgage deferrals will be whether or not the bank continues to charge interest during that deferral period. If they do, and a person who gets back to making repayments at some stage when this virus passes faces the prospect of increases in their repayments, then they are again going to struggle to get back on their feet. And I call on the banks to clarify this position for many Australian workers and those with mortgages into the future. The same goes for renters. Many people who are stood down or lose their job who are renting will be unable to pay the rent and will face eviction. And no one should be evicted or potentially homeless because of coronavirus. Now, the state and territory governments, I believe, should look at doing what the United Kingdom government has done and ensuring that tenants are protected and that landlords cannot evict tenants during a period into the future until the coronavirus passes. So in conclusion, Deputy Speaker, these are challenging times for our nation, but we must all work together to ensure that we all do our bit to make sure that we minimise the spread of this virus. But the government must come up with a consistent message that reflects leadership to ensure that the Australian people can do their bit to make sure that this virus does not spread.
I thank the honourable member for Kingsford Smith. The question is that these bills be now read a second time, and I call the honourable member for Wills.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. We have heard, Deputy Speaker, that this COVID-19 is an unprecedented health crisis. We've all heard that. It really is an unprecedented time. It's certainly true. We've heard and now seen on our TV screens
on our streets, in the supermarkets, and felt that this is something that has already affected and will affect all of us right across this country. And of course, here in this place, we have our political leaders who tell Australians that we can only get through it by working together, by working for each other. I think that's a truth that's been told in this place. We can only defeat this by working together. And that's why we're here. We're here to work with each other across the political divide, despite our political differences, to serve the people of Australia, the people that we represent in the hour of need, in this time of need for all of us. And as we know, in any health crisis, in any national emergency that involves a health crisis, the key is to move fast, it's to move hard, it's to respond quickly. And even if it's not perfect, Deputy Speaker, we know that getting that response out quickly saves lives. And that is the key, that is critical, not just for the health response, but also for the economic stimulus that is so important to save people's livelihoods. And that's why we support these bills. The earlier package of bills and the supply bill that I rise to speak on this evening. We want solutions to make sure that the response and the solution is as best as it can be, Deputy Speaker. Because Australians are now, and have been for a while, seeking leadership, clear, consistent information from their leaders, from the government. People's lives and their jobs depend on it. And that's why we have to act together and act without delay. Now, we've been very constructive, Deputy Speaker, in supporting this package. We've supported the whole package. We've put forward some amendments that we believe make improvements to the package. That's part of our role, it's part of our responsibility to make this solution, this response, as best as it can be. While it's not perfect, it is urgently needed, and that is why we have not stood in its way. We have passed this package. And that's important to note, Deputy Speaker. We've suggested bringing forward some of the pension payments, the business assistance, more help for students, more help for the arts sector, for teachers and health workers. Ultimately, the only amendment we welcome the government expanding telehealth, which is a good step forward. We know that all of these things need to be done. We know that Australians are looking at us to make these things happen. And last night, of course, we heard about all of the range of measures to help flatten the curve. These are measures that will really restrict the Australian way of life in many respects. But that's what we mean by working together. That's what we mean by sacrificing for others. Sacrificing just for a short term some of the comforts of our standard of living and our lifestyle, just for a few months, we hope, that will help slow the spread of this virus. We want that to happen because it is critical that we don't have a peak of infections that we've seen in other countries around the world, which would overwhelm our health system. That's why we have pushed for these improvements. Having some of the pathologists that are working to work on tests, to increase the testing, to expand that telehealth, as I mentioned, and we thank the government for taking that step. Making sure the fever clinics are put up now, not in 6 weeks' time. And of course, mental health, Deputy Speaker, more support for mental health services, because as you would know, many Australians, many families and their children are feeling great levels of distress and stress. It's hard to explain this to kids, and parents themselves also are struggling with this. And this is an important element that we need to address, the mental health support that is needed. Deputy Speaker, in my community in Wills, I say to them that I'm here for you, and I know all the members here, whatever their political stripe is, are working hard for their communities. I'm here for the people of Wills. We've kept our office open. We're not doing face-to-face meetings. I think we've all stopped those, but we are taking phone calls. We are responding to people. We're providing the basic information that they need. We're assisting them in any way possible. People can call my office on 9350 5777 or email me directly at peter.khalil.mp@aph.gov.au. Because whoever they are, whether they're a small business owner facing an uncertain future, a parent, a carer,
a casual worker who's just seen up their work dry up for the next 6 months, or if people are struggling with rent or their mortgage, or they don't have a home, older Australians, the vulnerable elderly Australians that we've seen disadvantaged with all of this, and also at the greatest risk with all of these threats, or a disability, someone with a disability, or a carer. But also artists, and there are many artists in my community, musicians and performers, whose livelihoods now have come to a halt because of the hit on public places of gathering and the arts sector. All of these people are affected. We're all affected. And as I said at the start of this, we're all in this together. That means we have to work for all of the people in our communities and across this country to get through this. That is a truth of what has been said today on all sides of politics, that we must be kind to each other, we must support each other, we must work together to get through this. And I am here for my office are here and ready to help all of the people that I represent in my community and any Australian that needs assistance. And that's something we'll all be doing for the next few months.
I call the member for Oxley.
Thanks, Mr Deputy Speaker. We join here in this home of democracy as parliamentarians and representatives of our communities at the most unprecedented of times. We're not standing here as Labor people or Liberals or members of the government or opposition. We're simply standing here as one of 151 people wanting to do the very best in the most desperate of times for our nation. Just by looking around the House and in this building, in the nation's capital, we can see the impact this pandemic is having here on every Australian. But it's in the businesses, the schools and the communities across our great country that the devastating effects of this virus are being felt by every Australian, many of whom are facing the most challenging times in their lives. I rise to speak in favour of these bills tonight, and as one of the last speakers in the House of Representatives, I do so with great honour and privilege, and recognise those members of this place that aren't able to be here for this historic moment, including many of my friends. But I want to wish to bring aspects to the challenges faced by Australians due to the coronavirus, acknowledge particularly those working in our community, particularly in the mighty electorate of Oxley that I proudly serve. The coronavirus is reminding Australians that we are all connected and we all rely on each other. Australia is built on looking after each other. We may be physically isolated, but we are not alone. And I want to remind every Australian to be safe and to call a friend, a family member or a neighbour and let them know you are standing with them. And there are a number of people who are working on the front line that we've heard in many speeches today, and I want to place on my thanks and acknowledge them. Our heroes, who are doctors, nurses, paramedics, teachers, childcare workers, shop assistants, and particularly those in aged care who are still heading to work every single day to sacrifice and to look after the vulnerable Australians. In my remarks, I want to place on record my thanks to members of the Queensland Government who are leading this fight against this pandemic, particularly my friend Premier Anastasia Palaszczuk and her government that have done an outstanding job with their commitment to keep Queenslanders safe during this time. I've known Anastasia for 30 years. I know her compassion, I know her dedication and her complete resolution to making sure that every single Queenslander remains safe. Queensland is leading the nation, and I was so proud to see an outstanding announcement yesterday of $17 million to the University of Queensland School of Chemistry and Molecular Science to fast-track vaccination research for COVID-19 as an urgent public health priority. I want to acknowledge members of the government that are working day and night, the public servants in every office that are fighting this pandemic, particularly the Minister for Health, Stephen Miles, and the Minister for State Development, Manufacturing, Infrastructure and Planning, my brother, Cameron Dick, who I know is doing an outstanding job in trying to keep the supply chain going. And I want to place on record how I know how proud my parents would be of the work that he's doing. We are also being reminded of how important our fellow trade unions are, the workers, all of the people that are doing everything to protect our jobs, to provide jobs, and ensuring businesses around Australia have the essential groceries and products Australians need at this time. And I want to personally thank them for all of their extra efforts at this time, going beyond the call of duty to make sure Australia keeps on going. I know by talking to local residents how afraid they are, but Mr Deputy Speaker, when it comes to the bills we are speaking today, I want to first acknowledge the work the government's done so far, but like my colleagues, I want to emphasise that much more needs to be done and much more quickly. It's absolutely imperative that we do whatever we can, as soon as we can, to cushion the blow that the virus will have on the health of Australians and also the nation's economy. As our Labor leader Anthony Albanese has said multiple times over the past week, if we know we're going to make a decision in a week's time, why wait? We must make that decision now. And this can be seen in the amendments passed today that we have moved alongside the legislation we're dealing with tonight. But make no mistake, Labor will be supporting these measures put forward by the government, but we would be neglecting our duty if we did not emphasise where these can be improved to protect more Australians. Currently, there is nothing that we know that ensures that employers will use the money provided by the government to keep Australians employed. Right now, as we speak, hundreds, if not potentially thousands of Australians are losing their jobs, and many are facing mental health issues as a result of this decision. And as such, there must be measures we can make that stipulate that as a part of the contribution made by the government to businesses, that they will in turn keep people in their job. The more businesses who are able to do this, the more jobs we can save and the more we can help Australian families who are doing it tough. I know the sole traders, the 3,334 traders in the electorate of Oxley, the 6,436 small businesses with turnovers of less than $200,000 are counting on all of us to do the right thing by them. We know some of these measures will not come in till it's too late. This is not good enough, and I'll continue to speak out to make sure the people who need the money, the sooner we can get it to them, the better. We've seen today the long lines of people outside Centrelink. This shows the urgency, the need for people to access money now. We know that pensioners, the elderly, are worried that they won't receive their payments until it's too late. There are around 12,000 people in my electorate who are aged over 70, with many of them living at one of the 17 aged care facilities in the electorate. I want to make sure that they're protected and they're looked after as well. In conclusion, Mr Deputy Speaker, I'm proud to see our local temples, mosques and non-profit support groups come together at this very difficult time and offer support to the community. Many of the hospitality workers, many of the people who have lost their jobs as of lunchtime today. I pay tribute to the work of the peak bodies. I spoke with the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry today, the hotels industry, particularly those leaders that I know are turning themselves inside out about their workforce, the hundreds, if not thousands of workers that are scared about their future. I want to particularly offer my support to all of our wonderful churches and places of spiritual worship. I want to acknowledge John Redfern at Salvation Army Inala, Lisa Dijkstra of the St Vincent's de Paul and the Red Cross Australia who are doing amazing work, along with Pastor Mark Edwards at City Hope Church, Pastors John and Robin Robertson at River Life Baptist Church, Pastor Phil Cutcliffe at Springfield Christian Family Church and the Vietnamese Catholic community in St Mark's Catholic parishes in my own community of Inala. Just a sprinkle of those people doing amazing work, delivering food hampers, assistance and offering a strong message of hope and ways to connect in our community. In closing, Mr Deputy Speaker, I want to ensure that the government, that we come to this in the greatest spirit of bipartisanship and hope that our concerns are taken on board, that we can work together so that we can have no regrets, looking back that we should have done more. We know and believe as a nation that there is a God looking over all of us. In the Bible, 2 Timothy 1:7 says, God has not given us a spirit of fear, but a spirit of love, power and sound mind. Myself, my office, my staff are here to serve the community and our nation throughout this difficult time so that we can continue to build this beautiful country of Australia that we call home.
I thank the member and I call the Assistant Treasurer.
Well, thanks very much, Mr Deputy Speaker, and can I take this opportunity to thank all the members who have contributed to the debate on Supply Bill number 1, Supply Bill number 2 and the Supply Parliamentary Departments Bill. These supply bills again seek authority from the Parliament for the appropriation of money for the Consolidated Revenue Fund for the first 7 months of 2021. The total of the appropriations sought through these three supply bills is just under $83.2 billion. The bills must be passed in this session to ensure funding is available to all entities from the 1st of July 2020, thereby ensuring the continuity of program and service delivery. The appropriations proposed in these bills are broadly based on 7/12 of the estimated 2021 annual appropriation as presented at the 2019-20 budget, adjusted for economic and program-specific parameters and the effect of decisions announced as part of my EFO or included in the 1920 additional estimates appropriation bills, plus of course the COVID-19 related measures. This funding is therefore expected to last through until the end of January 2021. Again, I wish to emphasise that these bills seek provision only to appropriate money to fund government expenditure on an interim basis until budget appropriation bills have passed. Accordingly, no new measures for the 2021 budget are included in these bills. This arrangement allows for the budget appropriation bills to be passed in 2021 following the October budget. So again, can I take this opportunity to thank all members for their contribution, obviously those from the opposition for their cooperation and contribution on this debate, and commend these bills to the House.
In accordance with the resolution agreed to earlier, I will now put the question on the bills. The question is that the bills be now read a second time. Those of that opinion say aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it.